Welcome, everyone, our amazing virtual ACRL audience. Bummed that we can't see you in person, but happy to be able to share some of our work with you anyhow. I'm here today with Ann Hanlon and Marcy Bidney at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Kim Femme at the University of Denver, and Amanda Henley at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, to talk about collections as data as an organizational model. Today, this is a moderated panel. I'm the moderator. I'm Thomas Padilla. I'm at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We're going to discuss 3 different institutions' efforts to leverage machine-actionable archival collections to support research and foster data fluency across a range of different types of libraries. That's really one of the kind of values that we're hoping to offer with this session, is that we have sort of diversity in terms of the institutions that are represented on this panel and how they're approaching this particular challenge. The work of this panel was supported by and/or is actively supported by a project called Collections as Data Part to Whole, supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. I'm the principal investigator on that project. My co-PI is Hannah Skates-Kettler at Iowa State University. And then the remaining investigators are Stuart Varner at the University of Pennsylvania and Yasmin Shorish at James Madison University. This project is essentially a cohort development and regranting program. The primary goal of this project is to foster the development of broadly viable models that support the implementation and use of collections as data. Essentially, models that describe, the set of infrastructure and services that you might need to provision computationally amenable collections. And then also, models that sort of demonstrate how you may sustainably support and or promote the use of collections as data at your institution. Really important in terms of the projects that have been supported through the parent project, is that we did have this emphasis on, that proposed projects must demonstrate commitment to developing and implementing processes for addressing complex ethical issues inherent to engagement with cultural heritage data and the needs of marginalized and underrepresented communities, right? So no computation for computation's sake, and no doing the bad stuff that's happening in the private sector. We want to do better things in our community. That project, Collections as Data Part to Whole, has regranted to 12 different institutions now. And as I was mentioning initially, is that we really have had a focus intentionally in this project on supporting a range of different types of institutions. So, large public R1s like UNC Chapel Hill, which we have on the call with us today, to small historical societies like the Weeksville Historical Society in Brooklyn, to museums like the Carnegie Museum of Art, to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which we have on the call with us, to giant places like Harvard, and also places like the University of Denver, which we have on the call with us today. I mentioned earlier on that, in terms of the moderated discussion, we're going to have representation from 3 different projects that have been supported by Collections as Data Part to Whole. Ann Hanlon and Marcy Bidney are with us from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Amanda Henley is here with us from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Kim Pham from the University of Denver. So with my opening sort of introduction complete, basically we're going to move into brief 3-minute discussions or introductions of each of these projects by the project leads, and then following that we'll move into a moderated discussion that engages with the organizational implications of trying to do collections as data work. And I will now pass off to Ann Hanlon and Marcy Bidney.
All right, great. Thank you, Thomas. Marcy and I are, like Thomas said, from UWM Libraries, UW-Milwaukee. And we're part of the second cohort of the Collections as Data grant, with our grant period ending in August, thanks to some COVID extensions. And our project itself is focused on the AV materials in the UWM Archive's rich collection of LGBTQ+ archival materials. And you can advance the slide. UWM is the second largest university in Wisconsin and the second largest university in the University of Wisconsin system after Madison. We're an R1 doctoral granting institution in an urban setting with an access mission. We're fairly large with nearly 25,000 students, working with a relatively small library staff of 62 full-time equivalent staff. And you can advance. Our project is focused on the LGBTQ plus AV materials in our archives because they're underutilized due to their format and the difficulty of both processing and accessing them. So we're focused on extracting transcripts via machine learning engines, creating discoverability via a dashboard that will also provide some analysis of the corpora, and then using the project as a use case for professional development in the library and across campus with our campus partners. And you can advance the slide. So we're engaging with community-specific concerns regarding things like changing terminology in the LGBTQ plus community over time, as well as issues with accuracy of language in our machine learning models, specifically regarding LGBTQ plus terminology, and then discoverability and usability for a wide audience, all of which will be reflected in how we present the corpora and the dashboard. And that's something that we're developing so that it's legible and usable in the classroom as well as for the community. We'll make our code and our models publicly available, and we're developing digital humanities workshops with campus partners, which we'll talk about a little bit more, to address kind of foundational coding and other skills aimed specifically at the humanities, arts, and social sciences. So that's something that we know is a gap, and we're using this opportunity to develop partnerships and priorities around that so that we can confidently launch some workshops and other support via the library's Digital Humanities Lab. And importantly, for that goal and for our conversation today, we're also very much focused on how to use all of this as a launch pad to engage all of our library staff in data literacy and data science skills. So that's our overview, and I think we can pass it now to Amanda.
Great, thank you, Anne. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Henley. I'm the head of Digital Research Services at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And today I'm representing a very large and talented project team that's been working for the past couple of years on a collections as data project called On the Books, Jim Crow and Algorithms of Resistance. This is an ambitious project, which I'll tell you a bit about. But first, I'm going to provide some context with an overview of my institution. Next slide, please. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is the oldest public university. We're an R1 flagship doctoral granting university with over 30,000 students. We have 9 different libraries and 250 FTE making up our library staff, so we're quite large. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you a little bit about our Collections as Data project on the books, Jim Crow and Algorithms of Resistance. It's a Collections as Data project to create a plain text corpus of over 100 years of North Carolina session laws and analyze the corpus to identify Jim Crow laws through machine learning. The materials needed for our corpus were previously digitized and they're available from the Internet Archive. So to identify these Jim Crow laws, the data analysis librarian and technical lead on our project trained a model using a training set of laws that had been classified as either Jim Crow or not Jim Crow. The training set is made up of Jim Crow laws identified by scholars Polly Murray and Richard Pascal, and laws selected from our corpus that were classified by scholars on our project team as either Jim Crow or not Jim Crow. Our project also has a large K-12 outreach component, which has included presentations to K-12 teachers and the inclusion of learning objects on our project website. Next slide, please. So we're working on phase 2 of the project now, and by the end of this phase, we will have created several products, including resources for K-12 education and learning modules, 3 corpora, 1 of all of the session laws from 1866 to 1967, a corpus of the Jim Crow laws identified, and the training set. Also, a GitHub site where we're hosting documented scripts created for the project, a white paper that documents our processes and workflows, and finally, a website that provides access to all of these products. The images shown here are screenshots of the website. They show the searchable interface on the website where people can search for laws, the list of K through 12 resources, which include lessons, primary and secondary sources, a timeline, and a glossary, and then finally an essay written by William Sturkey, disciplinary scholar on the project. And this essay provides some context for the laws that we found. So this project has been a major undertaking that's required many staff with a wide range of skills. And I look forward to talking more about collections as data work with the panel today. Thanks.
So up next, my name is Femme. I am the Information Technologies Librarian at the University of Denver. And I'm just going to talk on behalf of our team of, there's 7 other individuals. We are represented across 3 departments in the library, special collections and archives, digital collection services, library technology services, and we also work with the faculty from the Department of Judaic Studies. So our original project was to create and provide access to transcriptions of historical medical records from the Jewish Consumptives Relief Society. And that's a group that operated from 1904 to 1954 in Denver and was formed by Jewish working class immigrants to create a tuberculosis sanatorium when there were no publicly supported institutions for tuberculosis at that time. So our collection is heavily used and it's digitized on our special collections website. And it consists of hundreds of handwritten letters, applications, and medical records that chronicle the history of tuberculosis in the early 20th century, but also reflects the immigration, growth, and development of organizations and individuals in Colorado's Jewish community. So in their use, we found that researchers were often repeating the process when they go to the physical archive or when they visit our site. They transcribe and collect these data in digital forms. But that was presenting itself as the first barrier to doing other deeper forms of analysis and other types of research. And so our motivation when we started this project was to build capacity in the services and infrastructure to support the production of transcripts for our collections, this one being our first pilot collection, and then provide that for researchers to use using multiple access points. So we decided to work with a software platform called Transcribus. We saw the potential of the software because it used modern machine learning techniques and its advanced ability to recognize visual features. And so it does more complex recognition that something like optical character recognition couldn't provide, and can do it to things such as handwritten or more inconsistently written texts. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we were 3 departments working together on this project in a smaller institution compared to UW and then UNC Chapel Hill. We're an R2 research institution with about 12,000 students and about 63 FTE, so across 3 different libraries. Next slide. So as a team, we carried out 6 phases of our projects with intended outcomes for each stage of the project to kind of form the basis of just a model for implementation and use through producing collections as data. So in the first stage, the initiation planning phase, that was the time that we spent working together to just plan out how to use the platform, but also form an ethics advisory board. And in that time, when we met with the advisory board, we also produced a terms of use that outlines the ways to, it guides us through the ethical concerns surrounding the access and use of the collection through computational means, and talking through how this collection should be used and what users should know or should agree upon if they're going to process some of this data. In the second phase, the data preparation phase, we generated the ground truth and training data, and we ended up publishing these data sets through Zenodo. This data set initially required some manual transcription that we eventually used in Transcribus to train our models. And then in the HTR pipeline phase, handwritten text recognition pipeline phase, we then did the actual training of the AI model used on the ground truth and training data, and did that in iterations until we got to a point where we were satisfied with the character error rate of our model. And that took about 18 months at a 10% character error rate. Next slide. In the collections as data phase, we then applied our model to the rest of the data set, and then we produced our first collections as data set with about 3,700 records of transcripts. In the next delivery platform phase, we worked on providing a method of uploading and displaying these transcripts in a digital repository. And then in the service phase, our ongoing phase, we built an API to access this data with our routes to our collections, as well as providing a UI to interact with the API, and then provided extensive documentation on how someone might want to go about reproducing a project like this.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So this is the part where we come back together and we spend a bunch of time just talking about this stuff and how it's gone, how it's impacting your organizations. I will just say, like, and I guess I'm a little biased as the PI of the larger project, but I'm so impressed with everything that you all have been able to accomplish, especially under super non-ideal circumstances. Cohort 1, which is the Denver and the UNC project, really kind of got hit toward the tail end as the pandemic started to set in, and Marcy, your project has really gotten nailed by COVID. So I'm just so impressed with all the work that you all have been doing. Okay, so on to the discussion. The first question I had, because we're talking about sort of like organizational implications of doing this work. The first question I had for the group was, how has your project impacted work across the library or campus? And has it been a catalyst for change where you're at?
And I can take it first if that's okay. Sure. So I think Marcy and I were talking about this, and we think there are two main areas where the project has made so far a significant impact in the libraries, not on campus. And the first that I'll talk about is just our partnership with the Web and Data Services Department in our College of Letters and Science. And everybody, Amanda and Kim both talked about their teams actually in their introductions, and I neglected to do that because it's much more than Marcy and me. And the co-PI on this is Dan Sierks. And he is he's the head of the Web and Data Services Department, and he also manages the campus's high performance computing cluster. And we couldn't do this without Dan. We couldn't do it without Carrie Costello either, who's the head of LGBT studies on campus and who's our disciplinary scholar. And we couldn't do it without staff in archives and in digital collections and initiatives and in distinctive collections. All of whom have contributed. But Dan has really been key, and setting up that partnership has been a big deal because he's in the College of Letters and Science. He's equally interested in how we're working with data science, machine learning, and collections as data to gain insights into how the campus can better serve the needs of arts, humanities, and social sciences in this kind of data science realm. So we're building out that bridge between the libraries and research computing, and that's also raised the interest of our Office of Research on campus as well. So, it's just done a lot to raise awareness and make humanities-focused, data-driven research a priority for building out our research infrastructure as the campus is taking notice of how to do that. As that's becoming more important. we're also leveraging the carpentries, to do the carpentries people or organization as a model for training researchers and coding and working with Dan to build that out as, workshops across campus. That's a good description of how this is impacting partnership building on campus. But the second area is in the libraries, and I think I'll turn it over to Marcy to talk a little bit about the task force.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have done as part of the grant is create a task force that is made up of librarians from different departments and divisions across the libraries. And we're using it to investigate how we can build on what we're learning in the project to develop a community of practice within the libraries to address these collections as data and research data issues. And you might have to help me. So we have representatives from cataloging and metadata, distinctive collections, digital collections, user services.
And access services.
And access systems. Services, thank you. Yeah, and systems. And the way that we put it together, Anne and I held a number of different brown bag meetings just to talk about what collections as data is and what does it mean, because we understood that these were new ideas for many folks within the library. And we talked about the creation of the task force and that we wanted representation from across the libraries. And we didn't want to choose the individual people who would be on the task force. We wanted them to self-select. So as far as their interest was concerned, either in what they already knew about collections as data or their interest in learning more about it. And I feel like it's created stronger ties between all of those departments and divisions. And I think so far has been a pretty good and successful model.
Great. So I can go next. I do think that definitely having the grant was a catalyst for change. It provided the funding and, very importantly, the set deliverables and a deadline to make sure that this work got done. Also, what was really helpful, I think, for us was having the specifications from the collections data part to whole proposal process where the team was really kind of prescribed. So you had to have a senior level administrator on the team. And I think that was really instrumental in moving forward that kind of conversation in our libraries. So we have, I guess, kind of similar to this team that Marcy was just talking about, we have a special collections digital scholarship working group, and there's people from all over the libraries, primarily special collections and the digital research services, which is my unit. But it's really just to try and bring together, different methods that could be used with special collections materials. So we've had some discussions in that group. We've used the collections as data 50 things you can do document that came out of Thomas's earlier project, the collections as data already computational project. And that's been a really good exercise for us. We've identified some additional potential candidates for collections as data. We've also talked about some ways that we might change our digitization workflow to to kind of facilitate this type of work.
For our institution, I just arrived at the University of Denver when we proposed the project and got the grant. So coming in pretty new to the institution, we were kind of rebuilding the way that our department, Library Technology Services, was working with the other departments. So in this case, Digital Collection Services and Special Collections and Archives. My position was vacant before that for about a year. We were, I guess, trying to rethink about how we could all work together. And one of the major projects that we were working on was rebuilding our digital repository. And so this grant opportunity was a good way for us to build on top of the digital repository project, one of the good things about the proposal was it asked us to think through how to make this project sustainable, and to think through like once the granting period ends, how would you go about integrating this into your regular operations, or just thinking through how to sustain something like collections as data. And so it was good the way that we had thought about working together. The grant stipulate that you wouldn't hire any new individuals to work on the project. So trying to think through like our existing roles and how we would work on this project and work on future collections as data projects. I think it was good. I think it definitely fostered ways to collaborate more and had more direction, with the deadlines and outcomes that we had said we would deliver. And so it was for me, it was useful because it was a good way for us to work in a definitely more departmental way. So some people from digital collection services would work more closely with myself and other individuals in our department on a regular basis. We would meet. At one point, we were meeting on a weekly basis to just talk about collections as data and to talk about whatever stage we were in, what we needed to document or report on, and so on. And I think another thing that I was thinking about was we typically a lot of the grant work or grant funded projects that come through our library was seen as library work, just in terms of our CVs. And this project was one of the first, or started this conversation within our faculty, that they should start also considering grant work to be research work, which was, it's interesting that it was mostly like when people would write about grant work on their CVs, it was considered to be, they should put it under library work. So that kind of started a new conversation about thinking about pursuing other grant opportunities, not just to hire people, or to provide more resources to do some existing work in individual departments, but as a way to push forward research and think about new and innovative projects that you might not get an opportunity to work on otherwise through applying for things like collections as data.
Fantastic. I was just going to say, before I move on to my next question, does anyone have any questions that came to mind as we were talking?
Yeah, if it's okay, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. First, I think that's really interesting from Kim, that the nature of the work was understood to be different because it is experimental in a lot of ways. And I know that we're building out brand new, like Amanda was saying, brand new workflows to do this work. But one thing that both Amanda and Kim said that I think is really important is that the influence of the grant on the kind of work that we're doing is really important. The prescriptive nature, like Amanda was saying, and the emphasis on building bridges was something that at UWM we really took to heart. It was something we were interested in doing already and kind of working towards with our digital humanities lab. But again, there's nothing like a grant to really raise priorities, and kind of put things in front of administration and other folks to really make those things an important priority. And, between it being a prescriptive priority of the grant and us actually needing those bridges in order to do this new kind of experimental work, we couldn't do it without the bridges that we built to Dan and his crew and to Carrie and his expertise. That's just been, despite this year of COVID, it's been this fantastic, really eye-opening and workflow opening project. So,
Amanda, did you want to add? add to that? Or
well, the one thing that kind of popped to mind is something kind of small, but Kim mentioned that, one of the kind of the rules about the proposal was that you couldn't hire a new person as part of the grant. But I will say that we were able to hire a research assistant for the project, and it was really, really useful for us to have that person. Their whole job was to focus on the project and to really move things forward. And we were able to find two excellent individuals. One person graduated and then the next person filled in. And they really did the work of the data cleaning, which was a huge, huge part of our project. We took the corpus and then had to split it up into all of the different laws, because our unit of analysis for the project was an individual law. So that was a very major undertaking, and having those RAs there to do that work was really important. And also it worked out really well for them too, because they both of them have gotten really excellent jobs now. So both of them have graduated and moved on to data science positions in institutions. So.
And it's really interesting to hear about how sort of the constraints in the design of the funding opportunity seem to have actually been helpful. So I think that's a great thing for us to know. And I guess just to say to the audience, I guess just to emphasize, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, but just to emphasize is that, one of the constraints was sort of around team composition. So that in order to submit an application to the funding opportunity, you needed to have a team lead, a senior administrator, and a disciplinary scholar. And so it sounds like in the various projects that was actually a useful constraint in terms of including various parties into the project. The next question we have is kind of related to your particular institutional setting. So kind of like I was saying in the beginning, is that we really tried to emphasize funding a range of different kinds of places. And that was intentional. I think, sometimes in these discussions around sort of emerging technologies or different ways of doing library work, there's this assumption, or there can be this assumption, that it's only the biggest, the best, the most well-resourced among us can afford to do those things. And we really wanted to push back on that and, basically support a range of different kinds of places so that they could articulate different paths into doing the work for different kinds of places. So, the question I have for you all is, I'm wondering if you can reflect on how your particular institutional setting, how was that important to your project?
I can start. So one really, I think, important thing for us is that UWM was designated an R1 just in 2016. And so it's a relatively new and coveted designation. And so that's raised the stakes for retaining that R1. And so the kind of 21st century research methods that are part of the Collections as Data projects are central to that, and really aligns with campus priorities around refocusing research infrastructure. So that means, in a positive way, there's a lot of moral support for the project and hope for it, from the top, as well as time and attention, even if there aren't a ton of additional resources or money, just as we, like many others, have been, kind of reeling from, budget cuts due to COVID and also ongoing state budget cuts. But that's been huge for us. And the other big positive thing for us has been that we've just always had, we have a traditionally strong community engagement at UWM, including, Carnegie, classified community engagement designation. But our archives has always had a really strong tie to the community. That's why we have the LGBTQ plus collections that we have. And so despite the fact that we've been doing this work, kind of under the constraints of COVID this past year, our disciplinary scholar, Carrie Costello, has pathways, to instructors and students in LGBT studies. Our archives has pathways to record creators for the collections that we're working with. So we've been able to continue to sort of gauge interest, engage the community, not in the ways that we wanted to this year, where we would actually go out to Pride Fest, down at the Summerfest grounds in June. But we have been able to engage that, and that's been really important in a positive aspect for our project.
I'll go next. So there's actually several things that come to mind about the trajectory of our project and just being situated at UNC. I think it's important to acknowledge that we were able to do a lot of what we did because we are a flagship R1 and we have these resources to be able to do these things. Like, not all libraries have special collection librarians with deep expertise in collections and also engagement with K through 12. Not all libraries have a data visualization librarian or a data analysis librarian and enough bandwidth in their software development department to be able to create this nice new website. So I do feel very fortunate to be at an institution with enough resources to make this happen. But one of the things I think that really helped this project move forward is the kind of an underlying value that we have with our university libraries leadership, and that's called One Library. So, you think about these large academic libraries, they're distributed, they have a complicated organizational structure, you have these silos and individuals in different libraries don't talk to one another. I think that's a pretty common problem. But One Library means that we make choices based on what's best for the entire organization, not one department, not one division. We try not to duplicate efforts. We try to work across units, and we're promoting the entire library as our brand, not one initiative, not one unit. So I think focusing on One Library is one of the reasons that we were able to work successfully across these multiple reporting lines. And another thing that affected this work is the Data Science at Carolina initiative. That's something that's really important to the university libraries. This is an ongoing discussion on our campus, and it's a relatively new topic. And we view collections as data as a contribution that we can make to the campus data science efforts that's really unique to the university libraries. And it's also something that highlights the need and importance of the humanities in data science, which is a conversation that we're being part of on campus. And the last thing is that Elaine Westbrooks, who's our university librarian, has a signature initiative focused on the work of reckoning. And inclusive excellence is one of the foundational elements in our strategic plan. And because of this, or through this reckoning work, each employee has an annual goal that's centered on IDEA, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And we've received library-wide training as part of this initiative. And there's a pool of funding that you can apply for if you're doing this type of work. And we were able to submit a proposal for that and get a little bit more funding to finish out phase 2 of the project.
Yeah, so in our context, we are a smaller R2 research institution, but despite that, there was still a lot of support for this kind of research grant project for various reasons. The first was the senior administrator that was on the project, Jack, was a huge supporter of the project. We had talked over when we were doing research on how to develop our digital repository, what kind of features and what kind of ways we want to support research through using our collections. And transcripts was one of the main features that we were talking about. One of the first things he had mentioned when I arrived there. So when we saw this opportunity to apply for this grant, he was completely on board, and we wanted to bring in a researcher, and Jean Abrams. She also works in the special collections and archives department as a curator for the Beck Archives, but also is cross-appointed as a faculty member in the Department of Judaic Studies, who was definitely on board and wanted to take part. So we already had my department and special collections and archives and the faculty member interested. And then at the time, Kevin Clare was working in the digital collection services. He was also heavily invested in working on the digital repository project. So folding in that digital repository redevelopment project to this project, we had already multiple departments involved and the senior administrator. So it was, since our library is relatively small, having 3 major departments meant like a pretty big chunk of the library was on board and interested in seeing us go forward. And I think it also helped that, as I mentioned with the grant, since we used some of the funds to, in a sense, buy out the time of some of the members of the Library Technology Services, some of the developers' time. That really helped to kind of protect, in a sense, our work to work in this project as well. And I think in our particular setting, we also our Library Technology Services manages a lot of the IT infrastructure. So we were able to focus a lot of our work and our time and resources working with our senior administrator to kind of justify how to use our resources to this project.
So we're running low on time. So the next question was going to be, how, all 3 projects involved a lot of collaboration. What are some lessons learned about collaboration, both within the library and with partners across campus? I'm going to ask that maybe we cut that down to like 1 lesson each. So what is like a big takeaway, a big lesson that you learned from trying to do all this like collaboration that made your project happen?
I'll jump in, and I'm going to go with the everybody on the same page one. So one of the things I think for us that was the biggest kind of challenge as far as building the collaboration was everybody kind of wrapping their brain around what collections as data meant for not only like the larger library world, but for them as individuals, and particularly with the task force. We spent a lot of time just kind of going over topics and ideas so that people could just really understand what it is. And so one of the things that we're walking away from that is that, people need to understand what the benefits of this collaboration will be for them going forward. And I don't know that we could have really known what those benefits were until we really started having these conversations. But once everybody understood what it meant for them and how they could participate in the collaboration, it was like a light bulb went off and things really just kind of started going forward. So it would have been difficult for us, I think, to introduce such a thing without kind of having the push from the grant, because the grant provided the incentive for us to keep coming together and talking about these things. And I'll stop there because of time.
This is another area where having a senior administrator on the project team really helped us. I have a tendency to jump right in and start getting the things done, start working on the project deliverables. Okay, what is the first thing that we need to do? But Maria Estorina, who's the Associate University Librarian for Social Collections and Director of Wilson Library, was part of our project team. And she said, let's put the brakes on things. Let's get to know one another. And it was just a really great thing for us to do, I think. We needed to make sure that we understood each other's expectations, set our working and meeting schedules, have a little presentation. This is what I bring to the group. These are my skills. Here are my expectations for what I hope to get out of the project. These kinds of things were, that was time very well spent. That was definitely something that I learned. One of the most important ingredients when working on a team is trust. And when you are first starting out on a team and you're working across units, and you maybe have not worked with someone before, that trust isn't there yet. I remember just saying, we expect the best from one another. meaning, we have to assume good intent until we really get to know one another. But taking that time to get to know one another, assuming good intent, I think was really, really important for our success. Nancy McGovern has a good article about this. It's called Radical Collaboration. She has a lot of good insights on this issue.
Yeah, I pretty much just have really similar kind of sentiments towards the way that we've collaborated. Also because I was new to the university, just getting to know everyone and spending a lot of time kind of working with each other, just talking through the project and what they think or want to get out of it, as well as what they think their role should be. But that changed, those roles were pretty flexible throughout the entire project. We kind of worked together and kind of took on each other's roles at some points. But I think establishing a way to communicate with each other early on and kind of learning what each other's strengths and interests are was a way for us to kind of figure out our role in the project and how we would work together. And I think that was pretty important for us, definitely, to succeed in this project.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. So I think technically we're at time, but I don't know, it's a digital world. So maybe they'll let us have another 2 minutes. I do want to get to this last question. We would just be quick with it, right? Just a couple minutes. I think it's important for the audience to know how are each of your projects planning to move forward?
Well, UWM, we are not done yet. So one of the big things is that we've the task force that Marcy talked about has put together a set of recommendations. A lot of that comes out of aligns with the responsible operations report, actually, that Thomas wrote for OCLC in 2019 now. And so we're putting that forward, but it hasn't gone forward yet. And we're just normalizing some new workflows in digital collections to push this out. And then the big thing that I think I already talked about, so I'll be quick, is just really formalizing, normalizing, and establishing these partnerships across campus to really set up a lot of professional development and skill building for the humanities in these areas. So
we're hoping to work with a faculty member who's designing a course for the new data science minor. We're also going to be using the education modules to raise awareness of the project and provide some training on Python and text analysis and critical thinking around algorithms on campus. We've been kind of flirting with the idea of expanding this work to other states as well. And we're continuing to have some conversations within the libraries about other collections that we could potentially turn into data.
Yeah, same. So we're at this point where we've developed a service model and are working with the reference librarians to reach out to faculty. We've had some workshops and we've got a lot of contacts for the University of Denver that we are now talking to and are have reached out and are trying to work with our API interface and are thinking about now what other future projects we'd like to apply this collections as data model to, working with special collections department on that.
Awesome. Okay, so I think right on time within that extra time I tried to buy us. It was just 2 minutes. I just wanted to thank you all for an awesome panel. I'm fairly certain, I think that in our whatever part of the virtual ACRL that we're all registering for, that there will be contact information where you could reach out to Amanda or Anne or Marcy or Kim to learn more about their projects. Thank you all.